Hello, friends. Welcome to Family Historian. This isn't a podcast about famous people. It isn't a podcast about celebrities. It isn't a podcast about history found in textbooks. This is a podcast about ordinary families, the objects they carry, the stories they protected, and the questions they left behind, and the discoveries waiting for those willing to look a little deeper. My name is Mariah. Most of my life, I knew my dad as the storyteller, the man who could sit at a kitchen table, lean against a pickup truck, or settle into a chair, somehow turning the entire evening into conversation. He carried stories the way some people carried photographs, not organized and not cataloged, just held, stored away, waiting for the right moment. Sometimes shared and sometimes not. And like many children, I assumed there would always be more time, more questions, and more stories. More opportunities to ask where things came from and why they mattered. But life doesn't always work that way. As my father got older, he began talking more about the people who came before him. Not because he was trying to create a family archive, and not because he thought anybody would make a podcast one day, but because memories have a way of surfacing when people begin looking back across the road that they've traveled. He would tell stories about family members and objects he had carried for decades, things that mattered to him, even if I didn't yet understand why. One of those objects was a small badge connected to Bernalillo County, New Mexico. It's not flashy. It's not valuable in the way people usually measure value. But somehow it survived. Through moves and through decades. Through changing seasons of life. And it remained part of the family story. A story that was never fully explained. Almost like a question waiting patiently for someone to ask it. Then there was the can, a simple can. At least that's how it appeared. My father had been given the can roughly 20 years before he passed away. For 2 decades, he protected it, he moved it, he stored it, he kept it safe, yet never fully opened the door to its story. It was known, but not understood. Then only weeks before he died, something changed. For the first time, he allowed the story to be investigated. He allowed questions to be asked, and with that simple decision, a door opened for him and I, not just into the story of the can, but into something much larger. At the time, I didn't realize what was happening. I thought I was simply hearing family stories. Now looking back, I think he may have been handing pieces of history forward to me. Not possessions, not heirlooms, not valuables. Stories, questions, fragments of identity. Pieces of a larger puzzle he knew he might not finish himself. And then my father passed. And suddenly everything felt different. The stories I'd heard 100 times carried new meaning. The stories became more important. The places became more important. The objects became more important. And the questions became louder. What surprised me most was that I never considered myself the family historian. I wasn't the one carefully building the archives. I wasn't the one collecting the records. And I wasn't the one organizing the genealogy, at least not then. But after my dad passed, the fathers kept finding me. And the badge, the can, the newspaper clippings, the photographs, the family names, the forgotten branches, the mysteries. One story led to another, and another, and another. Until eventually I realized I wasn't simply researching family history anymore. I was uncovering a world. What I've learned is that family history isn't really about the dates. It's not about the census records, and it isn't about the documents. Those things matter, but they're not the heart of it. They're not the heart of the story. The heart of family history is the people, the lives that they lived, the hardships that they survived, the communities that they built, the choices they made, and the stories they believed were worth carrying forward. That small Bernalillo County badge became one of these stories, a simple object, easy to overlook, yet somehow it survived long enough to arrive in my hands. Not because I'm the oldest, not because I was the historian, but perhaps because my father believed I would care enough to keep asking questions. Today, I don't have all the answers, and honestly, that's not the purpose of this podcast. This podcast is about the search, the investigation, the conversations, the discoveries, and sometimes the surprises. Because every family has stories. Some are remembered and some are forgotten, and some are simply waiting for someone to ask the next question. So this is where our journey begins, with a badge, a can, a father, and a daughter who started asking deeper questions after it was already too late to ask him directly. And somehow, through that search, discovered an entire collection of stories waiting to be told. Thank you for joining me for episode 1 of My Family Historian. In episode 2, we're stepping away from the badge for a moment and stepping into the world that surrounded it. Together, we'll travel back into New Mexico during the late 1800s and the early 1900s. We'll explore the communities where my family lived, worked, raised children, and built their lives. We'll look at places like Albuquerque, Bernalillo County, Cuba, and the surrounding region. What did those towns look like? What did people do for work? How did families travel? And what wars were shaping the nation around them? Who were their neighbors? And what challenges did they face? And what would daily life have looked like for ordinary families trying to build a future in the American Southwest? And we'll also begin following the migration paths that brought different branches of my family's story into the same places during the same era. Not as proven conclusions and not as family legends, but historical possibilities worth exploring together. We'll examine records, and we'll study timelines, and we'll begin piecing together the world our ancestors knew long before any of us arrived. Because before we can fully understand the objects that they've left behind, we first must understand the lives they were living. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep listening to the stories, and keep preserving the pieces of history that future generations may one day treasure. I'll see you in episode 2.